This video is going to be a film study look slash preview at what I think is the biggest matchup in many ways in the Ravens' visit to Cincinnati in Week 5. And that's Ronnie Stanley against Trey Hendrickson. Hendrickson is the Bengals defensive end. He's once again on a roll. 3 sacks, 6 quarterback hits. I think he has 3 of their 4 sacks on the season, 6 of their 11 quarterback hits. So they're really, at this point in time at least, overly reliant on Hendrickson generating pressures and sacks as compared to everyone else. He did deal with a stinger last week against the Panthers when the Bengals pulled away in the second half to get their first win following an 0-3 start. I'm going to focus this video on that matchup that often has not materialized since Hendrickson signed with Cincinnati in 2021. I think Hendrickson really transformed their defense because he's a legitimate 14, 15 sack per season guy. Great, I agree. But it's his motor, it's his mentality. He talks a lot of stuff on the field. I do think that Ronnie Stanley's kind of impervious to that. Those guys haven't matched up very often. It's pretty interesting. 2021, Ronnie Stanley didn't play a single snap after Week 1 against the Raiders. 2022, they did match up all 3 times. Stanley came back in Week 5, and I thought did a really nice job against Hendrickson. I thought that was a momentum swing such that Hendrickson was used to dominating against the Ravens left tackles in 2021, and that just was not the case in that Week 5 win in Baltimore at a night game. 2023, they did not play against each other one time. So this almost reminds me of like those professional boxing situations where 2 champions, for whatever reason, don't meet until later on in their career. They actually did face off 3 times in 2022. Getting back to Hendrickson, he did have 17.5 sacks in 2023. Officially didn't have a sack against the Ravens last year, but did have an important strip sack in Week 2. The Week 2 road win that the Ravens were able to go up to Cincinnati and craft out. He did have a strip sack that was called back, I think, in the second quarter. So that was interesting. But nonetheless, Ronnie Stanley didn't play in that game either and didn't play in Week 11 as well. I'm going to let some of the film flow through here. This will be Ronnie Stanley film. Something to consider, I think, as it relates to this game is how big of a pain Trey Hendrickson has been against the Ravens. So far this year, Stanley looks fantastic. Whether you're a Ravens fan, Bengals fan, or in the middle, if you don't know, Ronnie Stanley is playing at an incredibly high level this year. He's not just been his usual athletic self, but also very strong, able to hold his ground against bull rushes, basically anchor down, or even inside moves. And look, Trey Hendrickson uses pretty much every damn move that there is to use for a defensive end / outside linebacker out on the edge. The Ravens, in my opinion, need Ronnie Stanley to win most of their one-on-one matchups against the pass. This is Ronnie Stanley base blocking out Micah Parsons, and you can see all this mess in the middle. Derrick Henry's going to bring this back directly inside of that gap. He's responsible for a lot of point-of-attack blocks. He's also, so far in 2024, he's also responsible for a lot of backside blocks like that one that at least give Derrick Henry the option to cut back off of. I think that Todd Monken's scheme relies on tackles who can win most of their one-on-one matchups, hence the reason why they drafted Roger Rosengarten. He's certainly got big matchups over on the other side with Sam Hubbard, Miles Murphy, if he plays. I understand he's been dealing with injury. But in my opinion, this is the biggest matchup on these 2 players than probably anyone else in this matchup. I think we kind of knew in Week 1 that Stanley was looking more healthy. He was able to anchor down, like I said earlier. He was able to handle multiple different types of pass rush moves. And it's been nothing but improvement since then, or nothing but a continuation, I should say, of that quality of play. The Ravens come into the game offensively, leading the league, despite just being 2-2. They're leading the league in yards per play, which I think is important. It's 6.8 yards per play. Going into last week's game against the Bills, the Ravens were number 1 in the NFL at 6.6 yards per play. An increase. The defense doesn't look the same so far this year. They've given up a significant amount of rushing yards, as I mentioned earlier, and the Ravens, of course, are leading the NFL in rushing yards, and in fact leading the NFL in total yards per game at 429 yards per game. Only 2 other teams are averaging 400 yards per game or more, and that's the 49ers and the Packers. Derrick Henry is clearly, I think, leading the way for the Ravens. He's getting the majority of the touches, the majority of the opportunities to make big plays, that is. It really shouldn't be a surprise. Susceptible to the run, at least from a statistical standpoint. But they get back a number of key players this week in the front six or the front seven. Hendrickson suffered the stinger. He's practiced, as I understand it, practiced Wednesday and Thursday. As I record this Friday afternoon, I have no knowledge of what their practice situation looked like today, obviously. It's good news that he's practicing. Apparently, Mike Hilton will be out. I think another defensive end perhaps will be out. Maybe it's Murphy, and I misspoke earlier, but I could be wrong there. There's still enough talent in plans in both situations. And in fact, in the first matchup in week 2 in Cincinnati last year, they were able to run the football successfully against the Bengals, particularly to close out the game. As it relates to Trey Hendrickson, he's been a thorn in the Ravens' side since coming to Cincinnati from New Orleans in 2021. Just consistent pressure against the Ravens tackles. He lines up on the right-hand side. I'll go through some of his film here. This is an example of some of the things we can't do. We can't leave Trey Hendrickson with Pat Ricard or really anyone over there off that side. This is 2021 film when the Bengals came to Baltimore in week 7 and pretty much blew the Ravens away, at least on that day. 2021, Stanley didn't play a single snap against Hendrickson. 2022, he played in the week 5 matchup. Don't ask me why Ronnie Stanley played 90% of the snaps in week 18 in 2022, a game that really meant nothing, I think, to the Ravens. We had a third-string quarterback out on the field in Anthony Brown. And then, of course, he played 100% of the snaps in the wildcard playoff game that the Ravens very easily could have gone in there and won, the 99-yard fumble return for a touchdown by Sam Hubbard being the difference. 2023, they didn't play a single snap against each other. Winning this matchup for the Ravens or the Bengals, I think, is a huge swing point. Stanley's going to be left one-on-one, generally, in most cases. And keeping Hendrickson off Lamar is the goal. We'll go through some of Hendrickson's film here. First of all, the thing that I like the most, even though I'm a Ravens fan, is that there's a lot of moves here. The high gear. He was a big factor in the Bengals making it to a Super Bowl and then the AFC Championship game the year before, and he's always played well against the Bengals. This is film from this year. By the way, again, Hendrickson is going to be overly complicated with Trey Hendrickson. It's not like he's running the same move. Yeah, I think I misspoke a moment ago and said, Taylor, really unusual set here. He ends up with his inside hand trying to punch first. It almost looks like he's hurt. It almost looks like his left arm or something wrong with it because he's not using it at all. Additional to that, he has Pacheco on the outside. Chiefs, like I said, he's got 3 for the year. Always going to be working against the left tackle, and it's going to be a challenge to, well, the challenge for the Ravens is to slow him down perhaps with the screen game. Our screens have been working at a phenomenal rate so far this year. I don't know about you. I continue to be amazed and surprised by it. We were a much better screen team last year under Monken, certainly, than we were under Greg Roman. Things were very clunky in terms of the screen concepts prior to 2023. Monken got a lot of traction out of those screens. This year has been even better. I've referenced this a couple of times. 5 of our last 6 screens, I think, have gone for 10-plus yards. Getting into some more film from last week against the Panthers, who actually gave them problems at times in the run game. I think they finished with 155 on the ground. Chuba Hubbard finished with 120 or 108, excuse me. Hendrickson is a guy who makes big plays. I don't know why he's not credited with some type of statistical designation here. There's nothing on the NFL website. Andy Dalton doesn't throw this football 15, 18 yards in the air. It happens because Trey Hendrickson gets through there, slaps his hand, the ball, causes it to be deflected. And, oh, by the way, that is Von Bell back with the Bengals after 1 year away. I think a brilliant acquisition or reacquisition of a guy who's tough, talented. No, I don't think that Von Bell and Geno Stone have looked great on some run concepts, particularly outside to the boundary. So that should sound appeasing for Ravens fans from the standpoint of we run the ball to the boundary a lot, particularly to our left. The problem is that's where Trey Hendrickson will be. Now, in this particular case, he's not on the field. I think we are third quarter against the Panthers. I don't know that they can afford to have him off the field unless some other guys, Joseph Asai, Sam Hubbard, maybe they're going to blitz some inside linebackers or nickel DBs. Without Mike Hilton, who is a constant disruptor, and if Trey Hendrickson off the field for any length of time, either to rest or re-aggravation of a stinger, I think the Bengals pass rush looks like the weakest pass rush we have seen so far this year. Now, that may prove to be not the case. If Hendrickson gets out there, dominates Ronnie Stanley, wins a lot of one-on-ones, they certainly could generate pressure. They've done it before. But without Hendrickson on the field, this Bengals team has only produced 1 sack in 2024. Pretty amazing. All right, so some stuff against the run. He's very aware, very savvy. I would say stays very balanced. He doesn't get himself out of position. He's a guy who stays square. And so what I mean by that is taking on blocks, he's generally not going to wrong arm them. He's generally not going to run upfield. If his key releases inside, in this case his key is the tackle, and he's got a mesh, he's going to step down and stay square to the line of scrimmage and keep himself in position to either close down on the running back after the give, go upfield if, say, the quarterback were to keep it and boot out to the outside, or in this case, it's a reverse to Xavier Leggett, who had a really nice game against them last week. I think 6 catches, including 1 touchdown. He puts himself in position to make plays. He's also very physical against tight ends and in the run game. If you can't tell, I think extremely highly of Trey Hendrickson. Watching him play a lot of football the last 2 or 3 years, yes, it's annoying. As a Ravens fan, it's annoying some of the things he does post-snap. Sometimes I think he pushes the envelope or maybe steps over the line a little bit. I did notice a couple of moments when Ronnie Stanley played against him in 2022 where he tried to engage Ronnie Stanley verbally and Ronnie just doesn't get involved and he's above it. This is an example of what Hendrickson's going to do against the run game when he's left unblocked. So when I mentioned staying square, this happens to be a 14-yard gain for Sanders into the boundary where the Ravens run the football a lot. He will stay square and he will set kick-out blocks, meaning he will keep his outside arm free. And if we're going to get anything else done, it's going to have to be to the inside. He's generally not a wrong arm guy by call. He's very versatile, and I'm sure they have that in, but it seems to me that they wrong arm things more often when Trey Hendrickson is off the field. And what I mean by wrong arm is instead of taking this block on with his inside shoulder, which is what Hendrickson does generally, dipping to the inside and wrong arming it, getting your right shoulder into the right breastplate or maybe perhaps the right arm of the pulling offensive lineman and making that ball, instead of go on its tracks, kind of bow outside because you've wrong armed it. Basically letting your inside linebackers, safeties, and corners kind of flow over the top. They have had difficulty tackling, particularly off their right side on defense. I'm talking about Geno Stone and Von Bell. It's not to say that there aren't moments where they tackle well. I have seen a number of times where they either basically just try to get hands on the running back, number one, or kind of end up to the wrong side and I would say are indecisive about where to go. You can see here that Logan Wilson's being fronted up by an offensive lineman. Now, look, the reality is if Von Bell goes here, running back probably cuts this thing back. But there are 2 players for 1 blocker, and in this case, Von Bell jumps to the inside. In my opinion, we're teaching our safety to take it on with the inside shoulder, keep their outside arm free. Ends up being a 38-yard gain by Hubbard. I don't think that things are just going to be easy against the Bengals defense to run the football. Lou will have a good plan in place, and they will play good situational football, meaning they will sell out to stop the run at times, and other times they will err or eschew being too aggressive to try to stop the pass. Lamar and the Ravens and our offensive line and Todd Monken will have that we run to the boundary. That'll be a very interesting dynamic for me. What Trey Hendrickson does on option plays. I don't think he's going to violently run down the line of scrimmage to take the running back. Nor do I think he will just run at Lamar. I think he will freeze and sit and see what Lamar does. And if Lamar does keep it, no, Trey Hendrickson's not going to, quote, track Lamar Jackson down. But what he will do is stay on the inside hip or 1.5 yards to 2 yards behind the inside hip such that once the force player makes Lamar cut back inside, Trey Hendrickson will be there. They have always impressed me defensively. No, in 2023. I don't think the Bengals defense lived up to that standard that I'm describing. 2024 so far, against the run specifically, they have not met that standard either. I think they've given up 6 touchdowns, 3 interceptions so far through 4 games. I would have no problem if a Ravens fan or a Bengals fan who's being honest, intellectually honest, wants to say, I think the Ravens can generate big plays here. I agree. I'm gonna do it this way to finish up. If Trey Hendrickson were not to play, I think the advantage for the Ravens is huge and obvious. And not only can you get more done in terms of big plays in the run game, but you feel a lot more content throwing the football and pass proing with whoever Ronnie Stanley's got to go against up over there off that left side. Now, I do actually think Joseph Asai has a lot of potential. I don't want to see him achieve that potential against the Ravens, obviously, but he was a guy that I looked at pre-draft, I think 2 or 3 years ago. It was nice to see him have a big game in the playoffs for them, and then the unfortunate situation with the way that it ended, I think, in overtime. But nonetheless, I think if Hendrickson is shut down or quieted by Ronnie Stanley, the Ravens are still in that same dynamic, such that they can get a lot of things done in the run game and the pass game. We can rely on Lamar having more time, being able to throw the football downfield. The Ravens are not going to, in my opinion, I don't think we're going to be able to get away with running the football an overwhelming majority of the time against this defense. Even though Todd Monken has a lot of different run concepts to utilize under center, shotgun, pistol, I think there's going to have to be more play action built into this. I think there'll be times where Lou Anarumo and those guys try to take away our run game. And it's not just sheer numbers in the box. It's formation, recognition, getting players in the right spot, getting in the right look from a defensive standpoint. I wonder about the Ravens going tempo against this Bengals team, such that they maybe disconnect Lou from the guys that are on the field, get lined up as quickly as possible, run a play. I would look for something like that second or third possession. This is pure speculation on my part, number one. Number two, another element that I would like to see us invest in is some jet sweep stuff. They did have trouble with jet sweep against Carolina, and earlier this year, I think there was one like 8 or 10 yard gain. The jet dive, I think, is set up well for this week. We haven't used it yet. Jet sweep, and then Henry with the dive in the opposite direction. Basically, it's a zone concept, opposite the dive. In any case, this is my preview, my first preview of the Ravens-Bengals matchup. These are always fun to watch. They're nerve-wracking as a Ravens fan because the Bengals have been so good. Even last year, the games were close. Well, the first game particularly, the second game when Burrow throws the touchdown pass, goes out. At that point, you pretty much know that we're in control. I look forward to the game, and I'll try to get a preview out, an overall global preview of the Bengals defense. This one was to focus on this matchup, which has been seldom seen, really, since 2002. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how Stanley and Hendrickson match up and how the accumulation of the Ravens attack could potentially wear down Hendrickson and the Bengals defense as the game progresses. Appreciate you guys' time, man. If you think other Ravens fans would enjoy this film study look, this first preview of Ronnie Stanley versus Trey Hendrickson, really being the big matchup, the key matchup in the Ravens' visit to Cincinnati in Week 5, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach.